At 6 in the morning, my son sent a text. Plans have changed. You don't need to go. My wife wants only our immediate family. I had paid for everything, the cruise flights, excursions. I read the message standing in the kitchen, coffee, still warm, suitcase already packed. I did not call back. No arguments. I spent the next few days very quietly. I made phone calls, signed papers, and put everything into place just as I had for 30 years, silently, calmly, leaving no vulnerability behind. When they returned, the lock had been changed. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. To help me know how far this story traveled, please drop a comment with your country or city below. Also, please note this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or settings is coincidental, but the message I'm conveying is useful. Julian always said good morning, even when he was irritated with me, even when the conversation that followed was tense and full of the kind of careful phrasing people use when they want to wound, without leaving marks. He led with those two words. It was the one habit he carried from childhood that I had never stopped being grateful for. This message had no greeting. It went straight to the point the way a blade goes straight to the point. Plans have changed. You don't need to join the trip. My wife wants only family. I read it standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee going cold beside me. The early light was thin and gray through the window above the sink, the kind of light that makes everything look unfinished. Claire's photograph sat on the windowsill the way it always did, her smile caught in a summer afternoon, 3 years gone, and I found myself looking at her instead of the screen for a long moment. She would have read that message and known immediately what I was only beginning to suspect. I set the phone face down on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the cold tile. In 31 years of bank compliance work, I had learned that the first 60 seconds after a shock are the most dangerous. Your instincts fire before your judgment catches up. Men twice as smart as me had made irreversible decisions in those 60 seconds, and I had written the incident reports afterward. I picked the phone back up. The timestamp read 5:58 a.m. Julian knew I set my alarm for 6 on travel days. He had known that since he was a teenager, when I used to wake him for early flights to see his grandmother in Raleigh. Sending this at 5:58 was not an accident. It was a calculation 2 minutes before I would be awake enough to call him back immediately, late enough that he could claim the morning rush as an excuse not to answer. I read the message again. Then I read it a third time, slower, the way I used to read audit trails when something felt wrong, but I could not yet name the wrongness. My wife wants only family. Julian always put a period after every sentence, a habit so ingrained that even his casual texts looked like formal documents. This message had it. Every sentence, every period, exactly his rhythm. He had written it himself. Not Amber. Julian had sat down and typed those words and sent them at 5:58 in the morning, 2 minutes before my alarm, and had not called afterward because he did not want to be asked to explain them out loud. I took a screenshot and emailed it to myself. It was the same thing I had done for 20 years every time a document crossed my desk that did not feel right. The moment stops being just a gut feeling. It becomes a record. Then I opened my contact list and called Julian's number. It rang 4 times. I counted them the way you count things when you are trying to stay calm, when you are afraid of what the answer might be, and equally afraid of the silence that comes instead. On the 4th ring, the line opened. "Victor," Amber's voice, not Julian's. She said my name the way people say the name of a phone number they did not want to pick up, but felt obligated to answer anyway. Flat. Informative. Nothing else. "Amber," I said. "I need to speak with Julian. He's packing." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be intentional. "We're trying to get the kids settled. You got the message." I got the message, I said. That's why I'm calling. I'd like to hear it from him. There was movement on her end. A zipper pulling closed. Footsteps on hardwood. And underneath both of those sounds, barely audible but unmistakable to a man who had spent decades learning to hear what people did not want him to hear, a second set of footsteps. Someone moving to a different part of the room. Someone who did not want to be close enough to the phone to be asked to take it. Julian was there, standing somewhere in that house within earshot, choosing not to come to the phone. Amber, I said, keeping my voice even. Put him on. She exhaled, and there was something in that exhale that told me she had prepared for this call. Not hoped for it, not dreaded it, prepared. There is a difference. Hope and dread are emotions. Preparation is strategy. This trip is about us reconnecting as a family unit, she said. The phrase came out smooth, rehearsed, but not by her. I had heard Julian use that exact construction before in emails in the careful language he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while closing a door. Amber was delivering his lines. That was the arrangement. Family unit. People who actually felt like a family did not use the phrase family unit. They said us or the kids or we just need some time. Family unit was language you used when you were building a case. Julian and I need this without outside stress. My parents are coming to support us. That's what we need right now. I paid for this trip, I said. You offered. Her tone did not change. A gift is a gift, Victor. You can't attach conditions to it after the fact. The word gift landed with a particular weight. In my experience, the word gift appears most often in conversations where someone is trying to remove your leverage after they've already accepted the benefit. It is a verbal sleight of hand. By calling something a gift, they transform an investment into an act of charity, and themselves from a beneficiary into someone who has done you the favor of accepting your generosity. Where is my son, Amber? A longer pause this time. In the background, a sound I had not registered until that moment floated out from further inside the house. Laughter. A woman laughing. The kind of big, loose, self-satisfied laughter that fills a room on purpose, the kind that announces itself. Too loud for this early in the morning. Too comfortable for a household that was supposedly in the middle of a stressful departure. Loretta Vance. I recognized the register of her voice even without words attached to it. I had heard her laugh at enough dinner tables over the past 7 years to know that particular sound, the laugh she used when she believed she had already won something. We're leaving soon, Amber said. Don't come to the house. The kids don't need any drama this morning. The call ended. Not with a goodbye. Just the sound of the line going quiet. I stood in my kitchen with a dead phone in my hand, and Loretta Vance's laughter still echoing somewhere in the back of my skull. I looked at Claire's photograph. Keep your head, she would have said. Keep your head and figure out what you're actually looking at before you decide what to do about it. I had learned in the months after she died that grief has a way of making you slow. Not stupid slow. Like everything that used to process at speed now required twice the time and half the confidence. I had mistaken that slowness for gentleness. I had given people the benefit of the doubt because doubt felt like all I had left. I set the phone down and went to the drawer beside the refrigerator where I kept a yellow legal pad and a mechanical pencil. I sat down at the kitchen table and I wrote 3 things. 1. Julian sent the message, not Amber. 2. Loretta Vance is already in that house. 3. Gift. She used the word gift. I stared at the 3rd line for a long time. Claire's brother had used the same word once, standing in this very kitchen the year before she got sick. He had called a $20,000 loan a gift in retrospect, which meant he had decided somewhere along the way that the rules of repayment no longer applied. Claire had been furious in the quiet way she reserved for things that genuinely hurt her. Not shouting. Just a stillness in her face that was worse than any raised voice. She had told me afterward that she was not angry about the money. She was angry because she had let herself be surprised. "Don't let yourself be surprised," she had said. "The information is always there. People just count on you being too polite to look at it." I tore the sheet off the legal pad, folded it once, and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. Then I picked up the spare key from the hook by the back door, the one Julian had given me 18 months ago, pressed into my palm in the parking lot of a Home Depot on a Sunday afternoon with instructions to use it for watering plants when they traveled. The key was brass and small and had never been used for anything. I turned it over in my fingers once, then closed my hand around it and walked out to my car. The drive to Mount Pleasant took 22 minutes at that hour. I knew because I had made it so many times over the years that I no longer needed to think about the turns. My hands made them automatically, while my mind did the actual work. And what my mind was doing on that particular morning, as the sun came up low and pale over the rooflines of the neighborhoods I drove through, was the thing it had always done when a number did not add up. It started pulling the thread. My wife wants only family. No period. No abbreviation. Amber's language typed from Julian's phone. Which meant either Julian had handed Amber his phone and let her send the message, or Julian had dictated those words to her, and this was the possibility that sat heaviest in my chest. Julian had wanted the message to look like it came from Amber. A layer of distance. Plausible deniability. The kind of careful maneuvering that a man does not do on a whim. That kind of maneuvering takes forethought. By the time I turned onto their street, I had already decided that whatever I was driving toward was not a family conflict. Family conflicts were messy and loud and honest in their ugliness. What I was driving toward had edges that were too clean. I parked 2 houses down, the way I always had when I was conducting fieldwork at the bank. Never directly in front of the building you were examining, never close enough to be seen from a window before you were ready to be seen. A habit so old it was instinct now. Their house looked the same as it always did from the outside. White trim. A flag by the door that Amber changed with the seasons. The hydrangeas along the front walk that she had been meaning to replace for 2 summers. Everything in its place. Everything exactly as it was supposed to look. I sat in the car with the engine idling and the brass key warming in my closed fist, and I thought about Loretta Vance's laughter floating through a phone line at 6 in the morning. People do not laugh like that unless they believe the hard part is already over. I put the car in drive and pulled forward. Their driveway had 3 cars in it that did not belong there. I recognized Julian's Accord and Amber's SUV in their usual spots. The third vehicle was a rented suburban pearl white, the kind of oversized truck that people lease when they want to move a lot of things without admitting they are moving a lot of things. Its cargo area was visible through the rear window, empty now, which told me whatever it had carried was already inside the house. I parked at the curb, cut the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands in my lap. The hydrangeas along the front walk were drooping in the morning heat, their purple clusters gone brown at the edges. Nobody had watered them in days. I noticed that the way I noticed everything that morning, not because it mattered, but because my mind was running the way it ran during an audit, cataloging details without deciding yet which ones were relevant. I got out of the car and walked up the path. The doorbell sounded the same as it always had, a 2-note chime that Julian had picked out when they moved in because Amber wanted something that sounded in her words like a real home. I had been in the room when she said it. I had smiled at the time because I thought she meant it warmly. Standing on that porch with the morning heat already pressing down on my shoulders, I was less certain about what she had meant. Amber opened the door. She was dressed for travel, pressed linen pants, a silk blouse the color of a storm cloud. Her hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it hurt. One hand rested on the doorframe, and the other held her phone at her side screen, facing out, positioned at an angle that would capture most of the porch if she chose to use it. I had seen that posture before in conference rooms when junior auditors wanted documentation of a conversation they expected to go badly. "Victor," she said. My name again. Just my name. "I'd like to come in," I said. "We're in the middle of getting ready." She did not move from the doorway. "You got my message." "I got Julian's message," I said. "I'd like to speak with him directly." Something shifted in her expression, not quite surprise, not quite anger, something smaller and faster than either of those. A recalibration. She recovered in under a second, which told me she was good at this, and that she had been practicing for longer than this morning. She stepped back from the door. The foyer hit me like a wall. Not because of the smell, though the air inside carried the layered scents of 3 different perfumes and someone's breakfast and the particular staleness of a house that has been holding more people than it was built for. What stopped me in the doorway was the luggage. There was too much of it. Far too much for a family of 4 on a 7-day cruise. Rolling suitcases lined the wall, 3 deep, their tags hanging loose, and the tags did not read Hail. They read Vance. Hard-shell cases stacked beside the staircase. Garment bags draped over the banister, the long expensive kind that hold things you do not want to fold. Tote bags with the logo of a department store I associated with Loretta's taste in gifts, heavy on branding, light on practicality. A portable luggage scale sat on the floor beside the door, the kind you buy when you travel so often that overweight fees have become a genuine budget concern. I stood in that foyer and did the arithmetic. This was not supplemental luggage. This was a household in transit. "Julian." I raised my voice enough to carry through the house without being loud about it. "It's Dad." Footsteps on the 2nd floor, then on the stairs. Julian appeared at the landing, and the first thing I noticed was that he looked like a man who had not slept. His polo shirt was half-tucked. His hair needed another 20 minutes and a comb, and his eyes did the thing they had done since he was 9 years old, when he had done something he knew I would not approve of. They found a point just past my left shoulder and settled there. "Dad." He came down the last 4 steps and stopped at the bottom. "Why are you here?" "Because you sent me a text message instead of a phone call," I said, "and when I called back, your wife answered." He opened his mouth and then closed it again. Amber moved past me into the living room with the quiet efficiency of someone executing a plan she had already rehearsed, and Julian's eyes tracked her the way a man's eyes track the only exit in a burning room. From the kitchen, a voice carried through warm and loud and pleased with itself. "Julian, honey, is the shuttle confirmed for 9?" Loretta Vance appeared in the kitchen doorway a moment later, and she brought the whole room with her the way she always did, filling the available space with the sheer force of her presence. She was a tall woman, with the kind of posture that came from decades of believing she was the most important person in any room she entered. Her vacation outfit, wide-leg linen trousers, a coral blouse, a straw hat already on her head inside the house looked like it had been assembled for an audience. She saw me, and her expression did not change exactly, but something behind it did. The warmth in her eyes went from genuine to performed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Victor," she said, pressing one hand to her chest. "Oh, goodness. We didn't know you were coming by." "I rang the bell," I said. "Of course you did." She smiled, and the smile was the kind that a woman like Loretta had spent 60 years perfecting, wide enough to suggest openness, controlled enough to reveal nothing. Come in, come in. Can I get you some coffee?" "We're in a bit of a scramble this morning, but there's still some in the pot." She said it the way you offer coffee to the repairman. Calvin Vance was standing near the back window, with his arms crossed and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, examining a sheet of paper that he folded and pocketed when he saw me looking at him. He was a broad-shouldered man with the deliberate stillness of someone who had learned that being quiet in a room made other people feel the need to fill the silence. We had met 14 times over 7 years. He had called me Victor twice. The rest of the time he called me Buddy, which was how certain men address other men they have decided are not worth remembering. "Morning," he said. Not good morning, just morning stripped of its pleasantry. On the couch with both feet on my grandson's coffee table and an energy drink sweating a ring onto its surface sat Trent Vance. Amber's younger brother was 28 years old and carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had never once been responsible for a consequence. He had the build of someone who went to the gym for social reasons, and the tan of someone whose primary occupation was being outdoors near expensive things. His sneakers, I noticed, were a limited edition release that retailed for $400. The watch on his wrist was a brand I recognized from a catalog that had once arrived at my house addressed to Claire back when the algorithm had briefly decided we were wealthier than we were. He looked at me over the rim of his energy drink and grinned. "Hey, Mr. H," he said. "Didn't expect the welcoming committee." "Neither did I said. I turned back to Julian. He had not moved from the bottom of the stairs. His arms were at his sides, and his jaw was working the way it did when he was trying to decide between two things he did not want to choose between. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice low enough that it stayed between us. "When did they arrive?" He blinked. "Who?" I looked at the luggage along the wall, at the portable scale, at the garment bags on the banister, at Loretta already drifting back toward the kitchen with the ease of a woman moving through her own home. "How long has the Vance family been staying in this house?" I asked. The silence that followed was its own answer. Julian's throat moved as he swallowed. Behind me, I heard Trent set his energy drink down on the coffee table with a deliberate little click, and I knew, without turning, that he was watching the two of us with the attentiveness of someone who found other people's discomfort entertaining. "We should talk," Julian said finally. "In private." "We're talking now," I said. "In private would have been a phone call last week." Julian moved his mouth the way men do when they have an answer prepared, but cannot decide if it is the right answer anymore. The living room had gone quiet, in the particular way that rooms go quiet, when everyone in them is pretending not to listen. Loretta had drifted back toward the kitchen doorway and stopped there, one shoulder leaning against the frame coffee mug in both hands. Calvin had not moved from the window. Trent had set his energy drink down and was watching the two of us with the bright, curious attention of a man who had stumbled onto something more entertaining than what he had planned for his morning. "They've been here since Tuesday," Julian said finally. "Tuesday, 4 days ago." "You didn't mention it," I said. "It didn't come up." "Julian." I kept my voice the way I kept my hands during difficult interviews, flat, still giving nothing away. "I called you 3 times this week. It didn't come up in any of those 3 calls." He looked at the floor. Something moved across his face that I recognized from when he was a boy, caught in a lie. Not shame exactly, but the physical discomfort of shame, the way it sat in the jaw and shoulders before the words came. Loretta stepped fully into the room. "Victor," she said, in the tone of a kindergarten teacher, addressing a child who had raised his hand at the wrong moment. "I think what Julian is trying to say is that this trip has been very stressful for both of them. Amber's been struggling. Julian's been struggling. They needed support around them, and we were happy to come early and help get everyone settled." She paused, tilting her head slightly, and added, "You understand how that is, I'm sure. Family pulls together when things get hard. Family." She said it like she owned the word. "I understand completely," I said. I looked at Julian. "Is that what you were trying to say?" Julian opened his mouth. What came out was not what he had chosen to say. I could see the difference, the slight hesitation, the way his eyes moved to Amber standing near the hallway entrance before the words started. What came out was something else, something smoother and more practiced, like a paragraph that had been written out and memorized. "Dad, look," he said, and his voice settled into a register I had not heard before. Careful, modulated the voice of a man reading from internal notes. "You know how much I value our relationship. But Amber and I are going through something right now, and we need this trip to be about us reconnecting as a couple. We need space without added pressure. You've always meant well, but sometimes the way you engage with things, the questions you ask, the way you analyze everything, it creates a heaviness that makes it hard for Amber to feel comfortable. This isn't about not wanting you there. It's about us needing a particular kind of environment to heal." He finished and exhaled, and the exhale had the quality of a man who had just successfully completed a task. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at the coffee table in front of Trent, where a small leather notebook sat open to a page covered in Julian's handwriting. Not notes, not a list. Sentences. Full sentences with the phrases "added pressure" and "particular kind of environment" visible from where I stood. A script. My son had written himself a script to use on his father. The heat that moved through me was not anger. Anger was loud and fast and burned itself out. What I felt was something slower, the specific, particular coldness of a man who has just understood something he cannot unknow. Trent reached forward and flipped the notebook closed with 2 fingers, casual like he was tidying up. He caught my eye as he did it and grinned. "No hard feelings, right, Mr. H?" he said. "Family stuff is complicated. You know how it is." I looked at the sneakers next. Limited edition collaborative release, the kind that sold out in under a minute online and resold for twice the retail price. I had seen the same pair in that same statement listed under a sporting goods retailer 2 weeks before the watch. Trent noticed me looking. His grin widened slightly, the way it does on a man who has never once been held accountable for a thing and cannot imagine that today will be different. "Nice, right?" he said, extending one foot slightly to display the shoe. "Julian hooked me up for my birthday." "Happy birthday," I said. My voice came out exactly the way I wanted it to, even mild, carrying nothing. I had learned that trick in my first year at the bank from a senior investigator named Harold Cruz, who told me that the most useful thing an auditor could do was look like he had not found anything yet when he had already found everything. I turned back to Julian. "I'd like to understand something," I said. "You scheduled this trip 4 months ago. You confirmed my cabin 2 months ago. You called me last Sunday and asked whether I preferred the glacier excursion or the whale watching." I let that sit for a breath. "At what point between Sunday and this morning did the plan change?" Julian's jaw tightened. He glanced at Amber and gave her a small nod, barely visible, the kind of signal that people exchange when a plan is proceeding on schedule. She straightened slightly in response. They had rehearsed this. Julian had run the rehearsal. Relationships evolve. "Victor," Loretta said from across the room, her voice softening into something that was meant to sound therapeutic. "Plans evolve. You've been through a hard few years since Claire passed, and we all understand that. But sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is give their children room to grow without feeling watched." Feeling watched. I thought about the notebook on the coffee table. I thought about the luggage tags. I thought about the rented Suburban in the driveway and the $1,100 watch on Trent Vance's wrist. I thought about the way Julian's eyes had gone to Amber before the scripted paragraph came out of his mouth. "I don't feel like I'm watching anyone," I said. I feel like I'm standing in a room where a decision was made about my life without consulting me, and I'm trying to understand when that decision was made and why." Calvin Vance cleared his throat from the window. It was the first sound he had made in 10 minutes, and it landed in the room like a gavel. He had a deep voice that he used sparingly, the way men use things they believe are valuable. "He's made a decision about his family's needs. That deserves respect." I looked at Calvin for a moment. He held my gaze with the particular steadiness of a man who was accustomed to being the largest financial presence in any room he entered, and had mistaken that for authority. "It does deserve respect," I said. "So does the person who funded the household." The room shifted. Not loudly, just a degree or two the way temperature shifts when a window opens somewhere in a closed building. Calvin Vance unfolded his arms. It was a small movement, but I had spent enough years reading rooms to know that when a man like Calvin Vance unfolded his arms, he was done observing and had decided to participate. He pushed off from the window and took 2 steps toward the center of the room, and the shift in his posture carried the particular weight of a man who believed his physical presence was itself an argument. "Victor," he said, and he said it the way he said everything, like a conclusion he had already reached before the conversation began. "Nobody here is questioning your contributions. But contributions don't entitle a man to override his son's household decisions. Julian is 36 years old. He's a husband and a father. What he and Amber need right now is space to lead their own family, not a senior partner looking over their shoulder." Senior partner. The phrase was deliberate. Calvin ran a holdings company. He spoke in business vocabulary the way other men spoke in sports metaphors automatically, as a reflex, because it was the language of the world he believed mattered most. "I'm not his senior partner," I said. "I'm his father." "Then act like one," Calvin said. "Support him." The room held its breath. Loretta brought her coffee mug up slowly and took a sip without taking her eyes off me, the way a person watches a fire they are not certain is contained. Amber stood very still near the hallway. Julian had both hands in his pockets and was looking at the floor between us like he was reading something written there that only he could see. Trent, to his credit, had the self-awareness to stay quiet. I looked at Julian. Just Julian. Not Amber, not Calvin, not the audience arranged around the edges of the room like furniture. "Is this what you want?" I asked him. He raised his eyes. For 1 second, I looked for the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder on long car rides. I did not find him. What I found instead was a man who had made his calculations and arrived at his answer and was waiting with a patience that surprised me for me to accept it. "Dad," he said, "please, please." The word of a man who wants you to make something easier for him, not a man who wants you to stop him. He was not asking for rescue. He was asking for compliance. I nodded once. "All right," I said. I picked up my jacket from the arm of the chair where I had set it when I walked in. I smoothed the front of it. I did not look at Calvin again, or at Loretta, or at Trent, who had resumed his posture of studied casualness with the energy drink back in his hand. "Have a good trip," I said to Julian. "All of you." Amber's shoulders dropped a fraction. Relief loosely disguised as composure. Loretta set her mug down with a small, satisfied sound. Calvin gave a single slow nod, the kind of nod that was meant to convey that everything had been resolved according to plan. I walked toward the front door. The console table in the foyer held the same things. It always held a ceramic bowl for keys, a stack of the kids' artwork from school, and a small lamp with a pull cord that had not worked in 2 years. Julian kept meaning to fix it. I had offered 3 times. He always said he'd get to it. What it held this morning that it had not held before was a stack of papers thick and rubber-banded, topped with a padded FedEx envelope. The envelope was addressed to Amber, her name printed in the clean sans-serif font of a corporate sender. The return address was a firm in Charleston property valuation, real estate consultation, asset, assessment services, a property appraisal company. I did not stop walking. I did not reach for it. I let my eyes move across it, the way you let your eyes move across anything. You do not want the room to know you have seen, with the same velocity, the same casual sweep, as if it were the lamp and the key bowl and the children's drawings, as if it were furniture. But I read the appointment date on the label slip attached to the envelope's front. A pre-scheduled visit. Midweek. 7 days from today. 7 days from today, I was supposed to be in Alaskan waters with no cell service watching glaciers calve into the sea. 7 days from today, a property appraiser would walk through this house, through rooms I had helped furnish, past a staircase I had watched my grandchildren learn to climb, and assign a number to everything inside these walls. A number that would then be presented to a lender. A number that would determine how much could be borrowed against a property whose ownership I had never fully transferred, because Julian always said we would get to it later. Later had apparently arrived while I was packing for a cruise. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air hit me like something honest. Hot and thick with humidity, the way Charleston mornings are in the summer, the air carrying the faint salt smell of water moving somewhere not too far away. I stood on that porch for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to let my face settle, and then I walked down the steps to the front path. Behind me I heard the door close. Not slammed. Closed. The sound of a room exhaling. I walked to my car at the curb, got in, and drove 2 blocks. I pulled to the curb under the shade of a water oak that was old enough to have outlasted several neighborhoods, and turned the engine off. From here, between 2 houses with a narrow gap between their roof lines, I had a clean sight line to Julian's driveway. I could see the front door. I could see the rented Suburban. I could see the corner of the porch where the hydrangeas were dying of thirst. I checked my watch. 7:14. Claire had given me that watch for our 30th anniversary. It was not expensive by the standards of the watch on Trent Vance's wrist. It kept perfect time, and the crystal had been replaced once, and I had never once wanted a different one. She had the back engraved with 3 words that I had never shown anyone, still right here. I pressed my thumb against the back of the case and held it there. Then I thought about the appraisal envelope, about the date printed on that label slip, about the fact that a property valuation company does not schedule a midweek walkthrough of a residential property because someone is curious about the neighborhood. They schedule it because someone has already spoken to a lender, because the number they are about to generate has a destination. The shuttle arrived at 8:57, a white passenger van with a hotel logo on the side that the cruise line used for airport transfers. I watched through the gap between the houses as it backed into the driveway and the driver got out. I watched the front door open. I watched the luggage come out in stages, rolling cases first, then the hard shells, then the garment bags draped over Loretta's arm like she was carrying something precious. Julian came out last. He stood on the porch for a moment and looked down the street. Not toward my car specifically, just down the street the way a man looks when he suspects someone might be watching, but cannot decide if he wants to know for certain. He got in the van. The driveway was empty by 9:12. I sat under the water oak for another 4 minutes, watching the street settle back into its ordinary morning quiet. A neighbor walked a dog. A sprinkler system kicked on 2 houses down. The world outside that driveway had no idea. I reached into my jacket pocket and closed my fingers around the brass spare key. 7 days. A property appraiser scheduled for midweek. A FedEx envelope sitting on a console table in an empty house. Claire's voice in the back of my mind, clear as the day she first said it to me, standing in the kitchen of our first apartment with a dish towel in her hand, and that particular look she had when she had already worked something out and was waiting for me to catch up. The information is always there, Vic. People just count on you being too polite to look. I started the car. Before I reveal the ruthless plot hidden behind that piece of paper, please comment the word truth so I know you're still here with me. Also, please note the following story includes some fictional elements and may not be completely factual. If you do not wish to listen, you may turn off the video right here. The lock turned on the first try. I had half expected it not to, half expected that Julian, or more likely Amber, had thought to change the locks, or at least to ask me for the key back at some point in the past 18 months. They had not. Either they had forgotten I had it, or they had decided that asking for it back would require a conversation they did not want to have, or, and this was the possibility that felt most like the truth, they had simply not considered it, because people who are certain of their own plans rarely account for the variables they have dismissed. I was a variable they had dismissed. The door swung open, and I stepped inside and pulled it shut behind me and turned the deadbolt. Not because I was afraid of being interrupted, because I wanted to work without distraction, and 30 years of audit fieldwork had taught me that the single most important thing you could do when entering a space you intended to examine was to control the environment before you examined it. The house smelled different, empty. When people live in a space, they fill it with 100 small sounds and smells that you stop noticing because they are always there. Take the people out, and what remains is the structure, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint chemical undertone of cleaning products, the particular quality of air that has been circulated through the same vents for too long. It smelled like a house that had been used hard and recently, and then abandoned in a hurry. I stood in the foyer for a moment and thought about the mortgage documents I had signed 6 years ago, sitting across a closing table from a loan officer whose name I had long forgotten, with Julian on my left and Amber on my right, and a notary watching all of us with the professional detachment of someone who had witnessed too many significant moments to find them significant anymore. My name was on that mortgage. Not as a co-borrower exactly, Julian had qualified on his own income, but as a guarantor, which in the state of South Carolina carried its own set of rights and responsibilities that the loan officer had summarized in 45 seconds, and that I had spent considerably longer actually reading. I had a right to be in this house. That was not nothing. I went to the kitchen. The room was exactly as Amber had left it, which is to say, it looked like the aftermath of a military operation that had been conducted efficiently and without sentiment. The counter held an empty coffee carafe, a stack of reusable grocery bags. She had not taken a charging cable coiled beside an outlet, and a clipboard with a sheaf of papers clipped to it. The top sheet was a printed checklist, the kind Amber made for every trip, color-coded by category, with checkboxes that she filled in with a specific brand of fine-tip marker she ordered in bulk from an office supply website. I had seen versions of this checklist before. Passports, medications, phone chargers, car seats, snacks for the kids, confirmation numbers. I lifted the clipboard off the counter and went through the checklist, the way I went through any document top to bottom, once for content, once for anomalies. The items were what I expected. Nothing on the front face of the top sheet was remarkable. I unclipped the stack of papers and set them on the counter in order face up. Beneath the checklist was a printed itinerary. Beneath that was a copy of the cruise confirmation. Beneath that were 2 sheets of paper clipped together with a binder clip, a printed email exchange that I did not read yet, just noted the presence of. Then I turned the checklist over. The back was blank. Or it appeared blank, which is not the same thing. A blank page that has been used as a writing surface for the page above it is never actually blank. It carries the ghost of whatever was pressed into it, the grooves left by a pen or pencil, moving across the paper above, shallow enough to be invisible in flat light, visible enough to be read if you know what you are looking for and how to look for it. I did not have a pencil with me. I went to the drawer beside the refrigerator, the junk drawer, the one in every house that collects the objects that belong nowhere else, and found what I needed in under 20 seconds. A soft lead carpenter's pencil, the flat kind, left over from some project Julian had started and not finished. I laid the checklist face down on the counter and held it flat with my left hand and used the side of the pencil lead to shade across the surface in long, even strokes, the way I had learned to do it 30 years ago from a document examiner named Patricia Oakes, who had once recovered the contents of a shredded memo by reassembling it piece by piece on a light table. Patricia had told me that paper remembers everything. It just needs the right conditions to talk. The grooves emerged slowly, the way things emerge from fog, first the general shape of letters, then the specific forms, then the words. The handwriting was Julian's. I had been reading his handwriting since he was 7 years old, when he used to leave notes on the kitchen counter, asking if he could watch television before his homework was done. The particular way he formed the letter S, closing it at the bottom, into something almost like a figure 8. The way his lowercase t was always crossed slightly too far to the left. These were not things you forgot. The note was short, 4 lines. I read it twice to make certain I had it right. After Seattle, confirm with W. Appraisal midweek while he's offshore. Closing costs to V and H account. Property listed by end of month. Place father RC confirmed availability. I stood with the pencil in my hand and read those 4 lines until they stopped being words and became something else. A schedule. A sequence of steps. A plan that had been written out and then concealed beneath a grocery checklist, the way you conceal something you are ashamed of, but not ashamed enough to destroy. Place father. In the language of people who managed other people's lives without their consent, and that phrase had a specific meaning. RCA, set of initials I did not yet recognize, had confirmed availability. Availability of what the note did not say. It did not need to say. There was only one category of placement that required advance confirmation of availability, and that was discussed in shorthand on a hidden note rather than in plain language in a conversation. A residential care facility. A memory unit. A place where a man could be deposited and managed and kept out of the way of the people who had decided his presence was an inconvenience. I set the pencil down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when you do not trust your hands to make a sound. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The house held its ordinary sounds around me like they had no idea what had just been read inside them. I photographed the shaded checklist from 3 angles, close, medium, wide, with the counter edge visible for context. Then I photographed it a 4th time with my thumb beside the text for scale. Evidence is only as useful as it is legible, and legible means something different to a judge than it does to the person holding the paper. I put the checklist back on the clipboard exactly as I had found it. I put the clipboard back on the counter in the same position, the same angle, the same relationship to the charging cable and the reusable bags. Then I stood in the middle of Amber's kitchen and thought about the initials RC and the word confirmed and the phrase end of month and what it meant that my son had written all of this down and hidden it under a grocery checklist and then left for a 7-day cruise. It meant he expected to come back to a completed transaction. It meant that by the time that shuttle van deposited them back at this house, he expected the moving parts to have moved. The appraisal done. The property listed. The arrangements for his father finalized. Victor Hayes tidied away into a facility with confirmed availability cleared from the board like a piece that had served its purpose. I had paid for this house. The thought arrived not as anger, but as something quieter and more durable, the specific structural clarity that comes when you finally understand the full dimensions of what you are looking at. I had co-signed the guarantee. I had written the check for the down payment. I had stood at that closing table and pressed my pen to paper because my son had asked me to, and because I had believed at the time that the things you build for the people you love are safe in their hands. I walked out of the kitchen and down the hall toward the room Julian used as a home office, and my footsteps were very quiet on the hardwood, and the house gave nothing away. Julian's home office looked exactly like the inside of a mind that had been under pressure for a long time. I had been in this room before to drop off a box of tax documents he had asked me to hold, to help him move a bookshelf, when they rearranged the furniture 2 summers ago. But I had never stood in it alone with the door closed and no one else in the house and looked at it the way I was looking at it now. The desk was buried, not in the comfortable, creative way of a man who works fast and thinks faster, but in the anxious way of a man who has been avoiding something for long enough that the avoidance has accumulated into its own physical weight. Unopened mail in 3 different stacks, each one at a different stage of aging. A coffee mug with a dark ring inside it that told me it had not been washed in at least a week. A legal pad covered in numbers that did not resolve into anything. When I looked at them, just columns of figures with arrows between them. The arithmetic of someone trying to make a sum work out that refused to work out. I did not touch the desk yet. I photographed it first at the whole surface, then each section, then the legal pad with its columns of numbers. Then I opened the center drawer and found what people always kept in center drawers: pens, a stapler, a phone charger that did not match any current device. 3 business cards from people Julian had apparently met and then filed away and then forgotten. Nothing remarkable. I closed it and moved on. The room connected to the master bedroom through a short hallway, the kind of architectural detail that older Charleston homes had and that newer construction imitated without quite achieving the same proportion. I pushed the door open and stepped through. The bedroom was dim, the curtains still drawn against the morning light. The bed was unmade, not slept in and left unmade, but unmade in the specific way of a bed that multiple people have sat on the edge of while talking, while planning, while going through the kind of sustained, focused conversation that does not leave time for tidying up afterward. The throw pillows were on the floor. The duvet was pushed to one side. Both nightstands had objects on them that had not been there on the last occasion I had any reason to be in this room. I went to Julian's side first. He had always slept on the left since he was a child, a habit so ingrained that even when he stayed in hotels, he gravitated left without thinking about it. The nightstand held a glass of water, a phone charger looped around the base of the lamp, and a small white noise machine they used because the kids woke up at sounds. Ordinary things. I opened the drawer. Inside was a tube of hand lotion, a paperback novel with a bookmark in the final third, a packet of melatonin, and a compact black case approximately the size of a deck of cards. The kind of case that came with wireless earbuds or a portable battery or any number of small electronics that people carried without thinking. The kind of case that was easy to overlook because it looked like everything else. I picked it up. The weight was wrong for earbuds. Too dense, too even. I turned it over. On the back, a strip of white painter's tape had been applied with the neatness of someone who labeled things because they had too many things to keep track of without labels. I stood with the case in my hand and felt the specific cold that moves through you when something you suspected becomes something you know. Suspicion is uncomfortable. Knowledge is worse because it removes the possibility of being wrong, and being wrong in situations like this one would have been a mercy. I set the case on top of the nightstand, without opening it, and photographed it from both sides, tape visible. Then I photographed the drawer with the case removed, showing the context of what surrounded it. Then I photographed the case again beside the water glass for scale. The plan, as I understood it, was not difficult to reconstruct. Julian would engineer a confrontation, a phone call, or a visit. It did not matter which in which Victor said something that could be characterized as erratic, paranoid, emotionally volatile. He would have the device running before the conversation began. He would edit what he captured, or present it selectively, or simply describe it to a doctor who had already agreed to find what he was looking for. The recording would be the evidence. The evidence would support the evaluation. The evaluation would support the petition. The petition would become the mechanism. In South Carolina, covert recording of a private conversation, without the consent of any participant, constitutes a violation of state wiretapping law. I had reviewed enough compliance cases involving recorded communications to know that. The one-party consent rule required that at least one participant in the conversation had to know it was being recorded. A device hidden in a nightstand drawer, activated before the other person arrived with no disclosure of any kind that was not one-party consent. That was a trap. I reached back into the drawer and felt along the bottom. My fingers found a fold of paper tucked beneath the melatonin packet, thin and slightly creased, the kind of paper that had been folded and unfolded more than once. I drew it out carefully by the corner and unfolded it on the surface of the nightstand. The handwriting was not Julian's. Loretta Vance wrote in a large rounded cursive that leaned heavily to the right, the kind of script that women of a certain generation were taught in school and never fully abandoned. I had seen her handwriting on birthday cards and on the label of a casserole dish she had brought to the house after Claire died, the only time she had done something that felt genuine without an audience attached to it. The note was written on a half sheet of cream-colored stationery, no letterhead. J. If he calls or comes by, keep him talking and start the device. Don't let him know about the V&H mortgage. If he gets emotional, better. That's what W needs to see. Call me when it's done. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time slowly, the way you read something when you want to be absolutely certain that you have understood it and not simply recognized it. W. Wells. Dr. Adrian Wells, whoever that was, a name I had not yet encountered, but that sat in this note like an anchor attached to something larger that I had not yet seen the full shape of. The V&H mortgage. Vance and Hayes, a mortgage I had not signed. A financial instrument that bore my name and someone else's name, and that I had not known existed until this moment. My right hand was not entirely steady when I photographed the note. I noticed it the way you notice weather as a fact, not a judgment. Then I steadied it and took 3 clean photographs and folded the note back exactly as I had found it and replaced it beneath the melatonin packet and closed the drawer. I stood in the dim bedroom and looked at the unmade bed and the throw pillows on the floor and the curtains blocking the morning light. And I thought about the fact that this room had held these plans while I was 3 miles away packing a waterproof jacket and confirming excursion reservations and believing that what I was about to do was spend a week at sea with my family. The laptop was on this desk in the office. I had seen it when I came through. A silver rectangle closed with a charging cable running to the outlet that beside the desk, left plugged in the way people leave things plugged in when they expect to return to them. I walked back through the short hallway, sat down in Julian's chair, and opened it. The laptop was a newer model than I would have expected from Julian, which told me something by itself. Julian had always been practical about technology, in the way that people are practical about things they use as tools rather than status signals. His previous laptop had lasted 6 years, and he had replaced it only when the charging port failed. This one was slim and expensive, the kind of machine that costs more than it needs to because the person buying it wants to believe that the quality of their equipment reflects the quality of their thinking. Amber had probably picked it out, or Calvin had given it to him. Either way, someone other than Julian had decided what it should look like. The screen came alive when I opened it, asking for a password. I sat in his chair and looked at the cursor blinking in the password field and thought about what I knew about my son and what he knew about himself and what kind of man chooses the passwords he chooses. Most people used birthdays, some used addresses, some used the names of pets or children or the year of a meaningful event. The more security-conscious used random strings of characters that they stored in a manager app, which meant the laptop password itself was usually something they could remember under pressure, something reflexive, something that lived in the fingertips rather than the deliberate mind. I tried the address of the house Julian had grown up in. 8 digits, the street number followed by the zip code. Incorrect. I tried his wedding anniversary. Incorrect. I tried the date of his daughter's birth. Incorrect. I sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The same popcorn texture that the house had come with, and that Julian had been meaning to have resurfaced since the year they moved in. And I thought about the casserole dish, about the label in Loretta's handwriting, on a dish she had brought to the house 3 years ago, the only time she had done something without calculation attached to it, because Claire had just died, and even Loretta Vance had limits on what she was willing to perform in the immediate presence of genuine grief. Claire had died on a Tuesday, November 14th. A morning with fog off the harbor, and a nurse whose name I had never been able to remember afterward, no matter how many times I tried. I typed the date. Month, day, year, no separators the way Julian formatted dates in his documents, because he had learned it from me and never changed it. The screen unlocked. I sat very still for a moment. My son had used the date of his mother's death as the password to a laptop that contained the plans for what he intended to do to his father. I did not know what to do with that information emotionally, so I filed it the way I had learned to file things that were too large to process in the field. I noted it. I set it aside and I kept moving. The desktop was cluttered with folders and shortcuts, the digital equivalent of the paper chaos on the desk surface. I did not go through the folders. I went to the email client, which was open and minimized in the taskbar, and I clicked it open. The inbox loaded with the particular sluggishness of an account that had not synced recently. When it finished, I scanned the subject lines the way I used to scan audit logs, not reading just pattern matching, looking for the line that did not belong among the others. It was not difficult to find. The thread was labeled Re-Juno Evaluation Scheduling, and it sat between a notification from a streaming service and a forwarded news article from Calvin Vance with no subject line. I clicked it open. There were 6 messages in the thread. The oldest was from an email address I did not recognize, a Gmail account with the name A. Wells listed as the sender. The newest was from Julian, sent 4 days ago, the same Tuesday that the Vance family had arrived with their luggage and their plans. I read from the bottom up the way you read correspondence when you want to understand how something developed, rather than where it landed. The first message from Wells was brief and professional, in the way that brief professional messages are when the person sending them wants to appear legitimate while discussing something that is not. He introduced himself as a consulting clinician based in Juneau, Alaska, with experience in geriatric assessment and capacity evaluation. He said he understood Julian was seeking an independent evaluation of a family member during an upcoming visit to the area, and that he was available to discuss the parameters of the engagement. Parameters of the engagement. The language of a man who billed by the hour and had learned to make everything sound like a service. Julian's response was longer. I read it twice slowly, and each time I finished, I understood something new about the distance between the son I thought I had raised and the man sitting across from me this morning with a script in a notebook on the coffee table. Dr. Wells, thank you for your quick response. Here is the situation. Emotional instability over the past 18 months. I have documented several incidents with my wife's assistance. We will be traveling on a cruise itinerary that includes a port call at Juneau on day 5. I would like to arrange an evaluation during that stop, ideally framed as a routine wellness check so as not to alarm him. I need documentation that reflects his current cognitive state accurately. I am prepared to compensate you for your time and discretions on a cash basis. Please advise on your standard rate and what documentation you can provide following the session. I stopped it framed as a routine wellness check so as not to alarm him. There it was. Not an evaluation. A procedure conducted without the subject's informed consent, designed to produce a specific outcome paid for in cash to avoid a paper trail. In the world I had worked in for 30 years, that sentence alone was enough to open a file. Wells had responded within the hour. He confirmed his availability on the day in question, outlined what he described as a flexible assessment protocol, and named a figure $3,500 cash or certified check payable on the day that told me he had done this before and had settled on a price that was high enough to justify the risk and low enough to avoid triggering the kind of scrutiny that larger payments attracted, Julian had confirmed. He had written one final line at the bottom of his last message that I read, and then read again, and then photographed with my phone before I did anything else. He'll be agitated about being left behind. That should give you what you need. I forwarded the entire thread to my personal email address. Then I forwarded it to a second address, a backup account I had maintained since my banking days for exactly this kind of redundancy. Then I took photographs of the screen showing each message, the sender addresses, the timestamps, the thread headers. Evidence that exists in only one place is evidence that can be made to disappear. I sat back in Julian's chair and pressed my palms flat against my thighs and breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, the way the cardiologist had told me to when my blood pressure climbed, the way Claire used to remind me to when I came home from a difficult week and forgot that I had left the office. Breathe, Vic, she used to say. The paper will still be there when you finish breathing. The paper was still there. I clicked to the next folder in the email sidebar, the one labeled Sent, and began to scroll. The Sent folder had 43 messages in it from the past 30 days. Most of them were ordinary forwarded articles of back and forth with a contractor about a bathroom fixture that had been leaking since February confirmation emails for the cruise booking that I recognized because I had received copies of some of them myself. Julian had included me on the initial itinerary thread, back when the trip was still something we were all going to do together, back before it became something else entirely. I scanned past those. Near the bottom of the recent messages between a note to his accountant and a response to something from Calvin Vance that had no subject line, I found what I was looking for without quite knowing I was looking for it. The subject line read, Beneficiary Update Policy Confirmation Request, and the recipient was a domain I recognized immediately, a major national life insurance carrier, one of the 4 largest in the country, whose name I had encountered on statements in my own files for the better part of 2 decades. I opened it. The message was short. Julian had written 4 sentences asking the carrier to confirm receipt of a change of beneficiary form, submitted via their online portal, and requesting that the updated designation be reflected in the policy records at the earliest opportunity. He included the policy number at the bottom. I did not need to look it up. I had that number memorized the same way I had memorized Claire's social security number and the routing number of our joint account, not deliberately, but through repetition, through years of writing it on tax documents and renewal forms, and the annual review statements that came every January. It was my policy. A term life contract I had held for 22 years converted to permanent coverage 8 years ago when the rates were favorable, and the advisor I trusted told me the math made sense. The face value was $2 million. I had named Claire as primary beneficiary when we took it out. After she died, I had updated the designation to name my sister Marlene, the only person left in my immediate family who had any legitimate claim on what I left behind. The only person who had sat with me through those first months after Claire was gone, and had not once tried to tell me what I should be feeling or how quickly I should be recovering from it. Marlene's name should have been on that policy. I went to the insurance carrier's website on Julian's laptop and entered the policy number and my date of birth into the policyholder portal. The system recognized the credentials because I had set them up myself years ago and had never given Julian the login because there had never been a reason to. The current beneficiary designation loaded on the screen. Primary beneficiary, Amber Christine Hale, 100%. Secondary beneficiary, Vance Family Holdings, LLC, 100% in the event the primary predeceases the insured. I sat with that on the screen in front of me for long enough that the screensaver would have activated if I had not moved the cursor. Amber Christine Hale. And behind her, if she was gone, a limited liability company bearing her family's name. $2 million structured to flow from my death directly into the financial apparatus of the Vance family, with my daughter-in-law as the first gate and her father's company as the second. The form that changed this designation had been submitted 11 days ago, a Tuesday. The same Tuesday I realized that would have been 2 days before the Vance family arrived at Julian's house with their luggage and their plans. The change had been submitted before they arrived. It had been submitted while Julian was alone or nearly alone and had time to think about what he was doing. The signature on the submitted form, I could see a scanned copy attached to a confirmation email in the thread, was my name. Written in a hand that knew the shape of my signature well enough to approximate it, but did not know the specific pressure I applied on the downstroke of the V, or the way I always left a small gap between the first and last name that had been part of my signature since I was 19 years old, and a bank teller supervisor had told me it made documents harder to forge. It made them harder, not impossible. Julian had watched me sign things his entire life. He knew the shape. He had just missed the pressure and the gap. I photographed the screen. Then I photographed the scanned signature on the confirmation. Then I forwarded the entire email thread to both of my backup addresses and logged out of the portal and cleared the browser history the way you clear it when you do not want someone to know you were there, because I did not want Julian to know when he returned that I had been in his accounts. I needed him to believe for as long as possible that I was still the variable they had dismissed. The desk drawer, the one on the lower left. The deep one had a small push-button lock on the face of it, the kind that comes standard on mid-range office furniture, and that can be opened with a letter opener or a straightened paperclip in under 40 seconds if you know the technique. Julian had mentioned the lock to me once offhandedly, saying he kept important documents in it. I had not thought about it again until this moment. The lock gave on the second try. Inside, beneath a hanging file folder containing what appeared to be tax returns, I found a small leather notebook, dark green, the size of a paperback, with a slim elastic band holding it closed. The kind of notebook that a certain type of organized person carries because they do not trust digital records for the things that matter most to them. I removed the elastic band and opened it. The first page had a date at the top, 8 months ago, and below it, in Julian's compressed, leftward tilting handwriting, a column of figures with labels beside them. Not household expenses, not investment tracking. The labels were names and entities and services, and the figures beside them were payments made and payments owed, and the structure of the page had the specific private grammar of a man accounting for things he could not account for anywhere else. CVH retainer, £4,500. Notary. AK Port. 800 Est Wells consult 3,500 cash. Do not record. RE Broker. Hartwell 2% listing commission contingent. I turned the page. More of the same, going back further, the figures growing larger as I moved backward through the months. A payment to a law firm I did not recognize. A transfer labeled CVH Bridge First Installment that corresponded to a date 6 months ago. A line that read Dad's POA Review Scope with Grant that had been underlined twice and then crossed out and rewritten with a question mark beside it. Dad's POA. The limited power of attorney I had signed after Claire died, the one the estate attorney had described as a standard protective measure, a just-in-case document that let Julian handle certain financial matters on my behalf if I was ever incapacitated and unable to act for myself. I had signed it in good faith. The way you sign things for people you trust without reading every clause the way you would read a document from a stranger, because trust is the thing that makes the reading feel unnecessary. The notebook told me that Julian had been reviewing the scope of that document with someone named Grant, almost certainly Philip Garrett, whose name I did not yet know, but whose role I was beginning to understand, trying to determine how far its authority extended, trying to find out how much of my life it gave him access to. I closed the notebook and held it in both hands for a moment. 38 years. That was how long I had been this man's father. 38 years of school pickups and baseball games and college tuition, and the down payment on this house and every phone call, and every holiday, and every moment of ordinary daily love that does not announce itself because it does not need to. I photographed every page. Then I replaced the notebook, refastened the elastic band, returned it to the drawer beneath the hanging files, and locked the drawer. I stood up and looked at the desk and the chair and the legal pad with its desperate arithmetic and the coffee mug with the dark ring inside it. This was not a family in conflict. This was a family in collapse reaching for the nearest solid thing, and the nearest solid thing had been me. I picked up my phone and dialed. Bob answered on the second ring, the way he always had in the 30 years I had known him, not because he was waiting for my call specifically, but because Robert Carter was the kind of man who answered his phone on the second ring as a matter of professional principle on the grounds that the first ring belonged to whoever was calling and the second ring belonged to him. "Victor," he said. "I need an hour," I said. "This afternoon. Bring your notary." A pause. Not hesitation. Bob did not hesitate. It was the pause of a man updating his schedule in real time. 2 o'clock, he said. "Don't come empty-handed." "I won't," I said, and ended the call. The drive downtown took 23 minutes. I parked in the garage on Broad Street where I had parked for the better part of 3 decades, the one where the attendant on the 3rd level still called me Mr. Hayes, even though I had not worked in the building next door in 4 years. I nodded at him and took the stairs and came out onto the sidewalk into the full weight of the late morning heat. The bank looked exactly as it always had. That was the thing about institutions. They changed their lobbies and their logos and their taglines every few years to signal evolution, but the bones stayed the same. Marble floors, the faint chemical smell of the climate control system working too hard against the summer outside. The particular quality of silence that banks maintained, not true quiet, but managed noise, the murmur of transactions and low voices that was meant to suggest competence and discretion. I had walked into this financial institution decades ago as a green assistant auditor with a cheap briefcase and a short tie. By the time I packed my cardboard box and walked out that door for retirement, my entire adult life had been spent learning how to read the hidden architecture of human greed. That long history was exactly why they never saw me coming. The teller at the nearest window looked up when I came through the door. I did not stop at her window. I walked to the reception desk where a young man in a blue blazer was managing the queue of people waiting for appointments, and I told him I needed to speak with the branch manager regarding my personal accounts. He asked if I had an appointment. I told him I did not need one. He made a phone call with his back half turned toward me, the way people make phone calls when they want to appear discreet, while being entirely visible. And 2 minutes later, a man came through the glass door that separated the lobby from the back offices. Daniel Mercer was in his mid-40s, with the careful grooming of a man who understood that his appearance was part of his professional function. He had the particular manner of branch managers everywhere, warm enough to seem accessible, measured enough to seem in control, practiced enough that both qualities had long since stopped requiring any conscious effort. "Mr. Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "Daniel Mercer. It's good to see you. Why don't we step into my office?" His office was small and tidy, with a plant on the windowsill that was real rather than artificial, which told me he cared about the impression the room made. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and I sat and he sat, and he folded his hands on the desk with the posture of a man preparing to manage a situation he had already been briefed on. That posture told me everything I needed to know before he said a word. "I'd like a full review of my account status," I said. "Current holds notations, access restrictions, and any third-party communications logged against my profile in the past 60 days. Daniel's expression did not change exactly, but something behind it recalibrated. "That's a fairly specific request," he said. "I'm a fairly specific person," I said. "I spent 19 years in this building writing the compliance procedures your staff uses to evaluate unusual account activity. I know what a notated account looks like from the inside. Now I'd like to see what mine looks like." A beat. Daniel unfolded his hands and moved them to his keyboard. "I'll need to verify your identity," he said. "Of course you will," I said. "That's the procedure. Run it." He ran it. I provided what he asked for identification. Security questions, a callback number, and he confirmed each item with the careful thoroughness of a man who was now very aware that the person sitting across from him would notice if any step was skipped. When he turned the monitor slightly toward me, I saw the notation before he said anything about it. It sat at the top of my account record, in the internal notes field, flagged in yellow, the way the system flagged items that required staff attention before processing. The text was brief. "Family member expressed concern, re-account holder, cognitive status. Account holder may present with confusion or agitation. Recommend involving family contact before processing large transactions." Family contact. Julian Hale. Relationship son. I read it twice. Then I looked at Daniel. "When was this entered?" I asked. He checked the timestamp. 8 days ago," he said. "A gentleman came in and spoke with one of our personal bankers. He identified himself as your son and expressed concern about your—" He stopped, started again. "About some behavioral changes he said he had observed." "Which personal banker?" I asked. Daniel gave me a name. A junior associate, 2 years out of college, the kind of employee who would have found it difficult to push back against a well-dressed man in his 30s expressing filial concern about an elderly parent. "I want that notation removed," I said, "and I want it documented that I requested its removal in person, with full identification, verified, and that no cognitive impairment was observed during this interaction." Daniel nodded slowly. "I can do that," he said. "I'll also need to flag the removal for our records." "Flag whatever you need to flag," I said. "And then I need to speak with your security officer." Daniel picked up his phone. He made the call without argument, which told me the notation in my file had already been making him uncomfortable, and that my arrival had given him permission to do something about it. Institutions, like people, were often waiting for someone to tell them that the thing they suspected was wrong was in fact wrong. 3 minutes later, the office door opened and Mara Jennings walked in. She was a compact woman in her early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the unhurried confidence of someone who had spent decades in security work and had long since stopped being surprised by the things people did to each other. She carried a tablet and a leather portfolio, and she looked at me the way professionals look at each other when they recognize a shared frame of reference. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I understand you have some concerns about your account." "I have documentation," I said. "There's a difference." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the acknowledgement of one. She pulled the chair from beside Daniel's desk and sat down and opened her portfolio, and I took out my phone and began. Mara Jennings listened, the way investigators listen without interrupting, without nodding along encouragingly, without any of the social signaling that people use to demonstrate engagement. She just listened, her eyes moving between my face and the screen of my phone as I walked her through what I had found, and she took notes in a small, precise handwriting that did not waste space on the page. I showed her the photographs of the shaded checklist with Julian's hidden note, the recorder in the nightstand drawer, Loretta's instruction sheet, the email thread with Wells, the beneficiary change confirmation, the pages of the green leather notebook, each one photographed clearly enough to read every entry. When I finished, she set her pen down on her portfolio and looked at me for a moment. "How long did you work compliance here?" she asked. 19 years in this building," I said. 12 more at the regional level before that." She nodded once, the kind of nod that meant she was filing the information rather than responding to it. Then she turned to Daniel, who had been sitting very still in his chair since the third photograph, and said, "Pull the full account history for Mr. Hayes. All linked accounts, all authorized contacts, all access logs for the past 90 days. Daniel pulled it without being asked twice. While he worked, Mara opened a different screen on her own tablet. The branch security system, I recognized the interface from the years when I had sat on the other side of tables like this one and watched security officers do exactly what she was doing now. She entered my account number and pulled the access log for my safe deposit box. "You have a box registered here," she said. "Box 114, last accessed by you 14 months ago." "That's correct," I said. "Claire's documents, insurance papers, our wills." Mara scrolled. Her expression did not change, but something in the way her hand stilled on the tablet told me she had found something before she said anything about it. "There is a second box," she said. "Registered 11 weeks ago under the name Vance and Hayes Trust. It lists your name as a beneficiary of the trust, and it was opened using a limited power of attorney that was submitted to our records department at that time." She looked up. "The POA on file is dated approximately 18 months ago. The limited power of attorney. The document I had signed in the weeks after Claire died, sitting in the office of an estate attorney on King Street, while grief was still making everything feel underwater. The attorney had walked me through it in the same tone people use to explain seatbelts, necessary, standard something you hoped you never actually needed. It authorized Julian to manage certain financial matters on my behalf in the event I was incapacitated and unable to act for myself. Certain financial matters. Not the establishment of trust entities in my name. Not the opening of safe deposit boxes to hold documents I had not authorized and had never seen. "Who approved the use of that POA for this purpose?" I asked. Mara's jaw tightened slightly. "Our records department processed the submission. The reviewing associate," she checked the log, "is no longer with this branch. Transferred to our Columbia office 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. 2 weeks after the box was opened." I filed that detail without comment. "What is in the box?" I asked. "Safe deposit contents are private," she said. "We can't inventory them without the box holder present. The trust is listed as the box holder." "I am listed as a beneficiary of the trust," I said. "And the trust was established using my identity and a document I signed. I would like to know what is being held in that box under my name." Mara looked at Daniel. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who was grateful that the decision was not his. She turned back to me. To access that box properly, she said, you would need the key and documentation establishing your authority over the trust. Without those, I understand the procedure, I said. What I'm asking you to do right now is flag that box for a hold. No access by any party without my direct authorization and in-person verification. Not Julian, not anyone presenting a power of attorney. No remote submissions, no uploaded documents, no exceptions. Mara made a note on her tablet. I can do that, she said. And I want you to know this qualifies as a reportable concern under our Elder Financial Exploitation Protocol. I'm going to open an internal file. Open it, I said. She typed for a moment, then looked up. There's something else, she said. She turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was a still frame from the branch's interior camera system, time-stamped the previous afternoon at 4:47. Our policy requires original documents for safe deposit access. They left, I said. They left, Mara confirmed. The associate noted that the male party became argumentative, and the female party asked to speak with a manager. The manager on duty at that time, another check, was Daniel. Daniel cleared his throat. They told me it was a family matter involving an elderly parent who was having some difficulties, he said. They said they were trying to protect his assets. I told them the documentation requirements couldn't be waived, and they should return with the original paperwork. There it was. The reason for Juno. The reason for the notary kit and the recorder and the Wells evaluation and the carefully engineered confrontation on a cruise ship in Alaskan waters. They had tried to get into that box the day before the cruise, and they had been stopped by a procedural requirement, a live notary seal on an original document. So they had taken the procedure with them, packed it into the cruise itinerary, and planned to execute it at a port of call where they controlled the environment, and I was isolated and could be maneuvered into whatever position they needed me in. I want a printed copy of that camera footage, I said, time-stamped, and I want the name of the notary service your remote verification portal uses. Mara was already typing. While she worked, I looked at the still frame on the tablet. Julian in his travel clothes standing at a bank counter, the afternoon before the cruise trying to open a box that held documents taken from my home with his mother-in-law beside him in the outfit she had worn to celebrate my absence. I thought about the phone call I was going to make, about the 2:00 appointment, about the folder of photographs on my phone and what they were about to become in the hands of a man who knew exactly what to do with them. Then I thought about the key. The box required a key. Mara had said it. And the key was not here. It was in a safe in a bedroom in Mount Pleasant, behind a row of handbags at an address where I was listed as a guarantor on the mortgage, and where the family who had tried to use my name like a credit card was currently 30,000 feet in the air. Mara, I said, I need to make a stop before my 2:00. She handed me the printed footage without being asked. I'll have the internal file ready when you come back, she said. I stood, shook her hand, nodded at Daniel, and walked out of the office and through the lobby and back out into the heat of the afternoon. I had an hour and 10 minutes. The house in Mount Pleasant was exactly as I had left it. I had half expected to find something different, a changed lock, a neighbor's car in the driveway, some sign that the world had registered what was happening inside these walls and responded accordingly. But the world outside had not registered anything. The hydrangeas were still dying. The flag by the door still hung in the windless afternoon heat. The spare key still worked. I went straight to the master bedroom. I did not stop in the kitchen or the office. I had 20 minutes and I knew exactly where I was going and what I was going to take. The closet safe was behind the second row of hanging bags, exactly where it had been 3 hours ago. The keypad accepted the house number code on the first try. Inside, beneath the ring box and the passport wallet, the slim leather pouch lay flat against the back panel exactly as I had left it, the two keys taped to the inside their teeth, catching the light from the closet overhead. I peeled both keys free from the tape carefully, the way you handle things. You do not want damaged, and dropped them into the inside pocket of my jacket, beside the folded legal pad sheet, with my 3 handwritten notes from this morning. Then I closed the safe, reset the keypad with a random sequence, and left the closet exactly as I had found it. On my way out through the kitchen, I paused at the counter. The clipboard was still there. The checklist face down, the shading from the carpenter's pencil still visible on the back. The stack of travel documents beside it. The FedEx envelope gone from the console table, they had taken it with them, which meant the appraisal appointment was still active, still scheduled for midweek, still waiting for the result of a conversation that was not going to go the way anyone had planned. I locked the front door behind me and did not look back. Bob Carter's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Meeting Street that had been renovated twice since he moved in and looked better for neither renovation. Bob had occupied the same suite for 27 years and had declined every offer to relocate to something newer and more impressive on the grounds that his clients did not pay him for the quality of his furniture. His name was on the door in the same block lettering it had always been, in slightly worn at the edges, the kind of signage that belonged to a man who had long since stopped needing to advertise. His assistant showed me in without asking me to wait. Bob was standing when I entered, which told me he had already cleared his afternoon. He was a lean man in his late 60s with the posture of someone who had played college tennis and never entirely stopped, and he wore his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, the way he always did when he was working rather than performing. A legal pad sat open on his desk, already covered in the tight, economical handwriting that he used when he was thinking faster than he was writing. "Sit," he said. I sat. I put my phone on his desk and opened the photo roll. For the next 30 minutes, I walked him through everything in the order. I had found it, the hidden note from the kitchen. The recorder. Loretta's instruction sheet, the Wells emails, the insurance beneficiary, change the green leather notebook, the bank notation, the camera footage from yesterday afternoon. Bob looked at each photograph without touching the phone, leaning forward with his reading glasses low on his nose, and he made notes on his legal pad in short bursts that I had learned over the years meant he was already building the response before I had finished presenting the problem. When I finished, he sat back and took his glasses off and held them loosely in one hand. "They were going to use the POA as a crowbar," he said. "The limited authority you gave Julian after Claire died, they were going to present it to every institution involved and let the language do the work. Banks, insurers, the notary in Alaska. Most people don't read the scope carefully enough to push back." "I read everything carefully enough to push back," I said, "which is why you're sitting here instead of on a ship." He put his glasses back on and picked up his pen. "Here's what we do. First, we revoke the POA today in writing, witnessed and notarized, and we send copies to every institution that has it on file, the bank, the insurance carrier, anyone else they might have submitted it to. The revocation is effective immediately upon execution. Second, we establish a new capacity document, a signed statement from you witnessed and notarized today, establishing a clear record of your cognitive and legal competence as of this date and time." "And the house?" I asked. "The house comes third," he said. "We do a title search this afternoon. If your name is still on the deed as guarantor or co-holder, we have options." He tapped his pen against the legal pad. "An irrevocable trust is the cleanest. It moves the property into a protected structure where Julian cannot refinance, sell, or encumber it without the trustee's consent. And the trustee would not be Julian. Who would it be? A professional fiduciary firm, Bob said. Nobody who goes to church with Loretta Vance. He said it without inflection, which was how Bob made his driest observations. I have a firm I use for exactly this situation. Experienced, independent, no social overlap with your family. He was reaching for his phone to call in his notary when my phone buzzed on his desk. Bob set his phone down on the desk and looked at the recording app on his screen for a moment, then saved the file and labeled it with the date and time and Puig's name. That call goes in the file, he said. Attempted intimidation by opposing counsel recorded with your consent. If he calls again, let it go to voicemail. He picked up his desk phone and started dialing before I had finished nodding. The first call was to the lender listed in Julian's notebook, the hard money outfit whose name I had seen beside the notation, CVH Bridge First Installment. Bob's voice did not change register when they answered. He identified himself, gave his bar number, and told them in 4 sentences that any disbursement tied to a personal guarantee bearing my name was subject to a fraud hold, that the guarantee had been executed without my knowledge or consent, and that if they released funds against it, they would be doing so with full awareness of the fraudulent nature of the underlying documents. He gave them Mara Jennings's name and the internal file number from the bank. He asked for written confirmation of the freeze within the hour and gave them his fax number. He hung up and dialed the insurance carrier without pausing. That call took longer. The carrier's fraud department had a process, and Bob respected processes the way surgeons respected sterile fields. Not because they were inconvenient, but because deviating from them created problems that were harder to fix than the original injury. He held through 2 transfers and 1 supervisor escalation, and when he finally had the right person, he delivered the same essential information in different packaging, unauthorized signature fraudulent submission request for immediate hold on the beneficiary, change preservation of all records related to the submission. When he hung up the second time, he made a note on his legal pad and looked at me. The lender will freeze, he said. They cannot afford to disburse against a flagged guarantee. The carrier will hold the beneficiary change pending investigation. That process takes 30 to 60 days minimum, and by the time it resolves, we'll have the fraud documentation in place. He tapped the pen against the pad. The supplemental card. Julian activated it from my retirement account, I said. I'm the primary holder. Bob slid his phone across the desk toward me. Call the bank's card services line. Report the supplemental card as unauthorized. They'll freeze it and issue you a new primary. I made the call. It took 11 minutes. When I finished, Trent Vance's $400 sneakers and his $1,100 watch were charged to a card that no longer worked, and whatever he had planned to purchase on the cruise with my money would have to wait for a form of payment that actually belonged to him. I set the phone down and felt something I had not felt since 6 that morning, a very small, very quiet sense that the ground under my feet was mine again. Bob's assistant knocked and opened the door. Mr. Carter, your 5 o'clock is here, both of them. Marlene came in first. My sister was 63 years old and had never once in her life entered a room tentatively. She moved the way she had always moved, with the forward momentum of a woman who had decided where she was going before she stood up, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, her jacket over her arm, because she had driven 2 hours from Beaufort, and the air conditioning in her car ran cold. She looked at me the way she had looked at me our entire lives, when she needed to assess whether I was all right, without asking me directly, and then she crossed the room and put her hand briefly on my arm. You look terrible, she said. Tell me everything. Hank Dalton filled the doorway behind her. He was a large man who had spent 22 years in the fire service and still carried the physical presence of someone accustomed to walking into dangerous situations without slowing down. He had retired 3 years ago and had, by his own account, not once missed the smoke. He shook my hand, with a grip that had always reminded me of Claire's description of him. Hank doesn't shake your hand, he anchors you. He looked around Bob's office at the legal pad and the phone and the evidence folders and the general atmosphere of controlled urgency and said, "What do you need me to do?" "Sit down," Bob said. "Both of you. We have about an hour before we need to make a decision about the house." I was explaining the proxy designation to Hank when my phone vibrated on the desk. I glanced at it automatically, the way you glance at a phone when you are in the middle of something else expecting nothing. The notification was from a number I did not recognize, a Seattle area code. I picked up the phone. The text message was 4 sentences long. It had been sent from a number I did not have saved, but the writing, the specific rhythm of it, the way the sentences were structured with the blunt efficiency of someone who was not performing for anyone told me immediately who had written it. I read it once. Then I read it again, not because I needed to read it twice, but because I wanted to be certain I had absorbed it completely before I did anything with it. Amber, not Julian. Amber, who had stood in the doorway of her own house that morning with her phone angled to record who had spoken about family units and boundary setting, and the particular kind of stress that required a luxury cruise to address, had just threatened to have me institutionalized if I did not undo what I had spent the day building. I passed the phone to Marlene without saying anything. She read it. The expression on her face moved through several phases in rapid succession: recognition fury, and then something colder and more deliberate that I had seen on her face exactly once before, the day she had sat across from Claire's oncologist and understood what he was actually telling us. "Screenshot it," she said, handing the phone back. "Already done," I said. Hank leaned over and read it from my hand. His jaw set in the way that jaws set when a man has decided something. "She just put that in writing," he said. "She did," Bob said. He had already added a line to his legal pad. "Which means she's frightened. Frightened people make the kind of mistakes that end cases." He looked at me. "Victor, we have enough to file for an emergency hearing tonight. If we move now, we can be in front of a judge tomorrow morning." The room went quiet with the specific quality of quiet that precedes a decision that cannot be walked back. I looked at the text message on my phone screen one more time. Then I looked at Marlene, who was watching me with the expression of a woman who had already made her own decision and was waiting to see if I had made mine. "File it," I said. Bob filed the emergency petition at 7:43 that evening through the court's electronic submission system with a cover memorandum that he read to me aloud before sending. It was 14 pages. He had also included a 1-page summary of the POA's stated scope versus its actual application, a document that read in Bob's flat, unadorned legal prose like an itemized list of every line that had been crossed. When he finished reading, he hit send and set the phone down and said, "Judge Patricia Odom. She handles emergency petitions on the Tuesday rotation. She does not like her time wasted." "Then we won't waste it," I said. I left his office at 8:15. Marlene had offered her guest room, and Hank had offered his couch. And I had declined both with the same gratitude I felt for being offered them. What I needed was not company. What I needed was a room with a door I could close where no one needed anything from me, and I did not have to manage how I appeared to anyone else. The hotel was 4 blocks from the courthouse, a narrow building squeezed between a parking garage and a dry cleaner, the kind of place that existed for people with early flights and people who needed somewhere to be that was not home. The room was small and clean, and the air conditioning worked, and I asked for a room on an upper floor, and the woman at the desk gave me one without asking why. I sat on the edge of the bed with my jacket still on and my phone in my hand, and I looked at the wall for a while. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out Claire's photograph. I had carried it since the morning had slipped it from the windowsill in my kitchen into my pocket before I left the house without quite deciding to the way you pick up certain things, because your hands know something your mind has not articulated yet. It was a small photograph, wallet-sized, the kind that got made from a larger print, and then lived in a pocket or a wallet for years until the edges softened. She was smiling. In the way she smiled in photographs she did not know were being taken, not the posed smile, the real one, the one that started in her eyes and arrived at her mouth a half-second later. Someone had caught her in the backyard on a Sunday afternoon, the summer before the diagnosis, and she looked exactly the way she had always looked when she was in a place she loved, with people she trusted. I held the photograph in both hands and sat there in the small, clean room with the air conditioning humming and the city going on quietly outside the window, and I let myself feel what I had been managing all day. It was not anger. I had expected anger, had braced for it, the way you brace for a physical impact. But what arrived instead was something older and more tired, the grief of a man who had spent 3 years trying to protect what she had helped him build, and had discovered today that the threat had come from inside the house she had helped him love. She would have been devastated. Not surprised, Claire had always seen people more clearly than she let on, had known things about Julian's marriage that she had shared with me only in the careful, hedged language she used when she wanted to tell the truth without removing all hope. But she would have been devastated anyway, the way you are devastated by things you saw coming, because foreknowledge does not soften the arrival. I know, I told her. Not out loud. Just the thought directed at the photograph the way you direct thoughts at people who are gone. I know you'd tell me not to let it make me bitter. I'm working on it. My phone buzzed on the bedspread beside me. A text from a number I recognized, Marlene's. Loretta called me 20 minutes ago. Said I was being used by Victor's lawyer to steal from Julian. Said if I testified tomorrow she would make sure everyone in Beaufort knew I'd turned against my own family. I told her I'd be in that courtroom at 8 sharp. Thought you should know. I read it twice. Then I called Bob. He answered on the first ring, which told me he was still at his desk. Loretta Vance contacted my sister tonight, I said. She told Marlene not to testify, threatened her reputation. A pause. The sound of Bob writing. Does Marlene have documentation? She has the call log, and she said she'd write out the conversation verbatim tonight. Tell her to do that, Bob said. Signed, dated, time-stamped. Witness tampering is a separate charge. If they're reaching out to our witnesses the night before the hearing, it tells us they know what the evidence looks like, and they're frightened. He paused again. Try to sleep, Victor. Tomorrow is going to require you to be sharp. I said goodnight and set the phone down. I did not sleep much. I lay in the dark and listened to the air conditioning cycle on and off, and thought about the closing table 6 years ago, and about Julian's face at the bottom of the staircase that morning, and about the 38 years that had preceded both of those moments. I thought about the word placement, written in my son's handwriting on the back of a grocery checklist. I thought about Claire in the backyard on a Sunday afternoon, not knowing she was being photographed, smiling at something just outside the frame. At 5:30, I got up, showered, dressed in the same clothes I had worn the day before, and went downstairs to find coffee. By 7:15, I was sitting in Bob's car outside the courthouse, with a paper cup going cold in my hand and the folder of documents on my lap. Marlene arrived at 7:22 in her own car, brisk and unslept-looking, and wearing the expression she reserved for situations that required her to be the most resolute person in the room. Hank pulled up behind her at 7:30 with a tie on that I had never seen before and would probably never see again. We went through the courthouse doors together. The hallway outside the assigned courtroom was already occupied when we arrived. Calvin Vance stood near the far wall in a charcoal suit that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. His arms crossed his face, arranged into the expression of a man who had decided in advance that the morning's proceedings were an inconvenience rather than a threat. Beside him, Loretta sat in one of the hallway chairs with her hands folded in her lap, her posture so deliberately composed that it communicated its own kind of tension, the stillness of a person who was holding something in very tightly. She looked up when she saw us coming. Her eyes moved from me to Marlene and stayed there. Marlene looked back at her with the unhurried steadiness of a woman who had driven 2 hours, spent a sleepless night, and was entirely prepared to spend however many more hours were required. A man in an expensive suit who was not Calvin stepped away from the wall and moved toward us with the focused walk of someone executing a plan. Julian's lawyer, I assumed, or the Vance family's lawyer, which was not necessarily the same thing. Bob stepped forward to meet him before he reached me. "Counsel," Bob said pleasantly. "Let's keep this in the courtroom." The courtroom was smaller than the ones you see in films. Fluorescent lighting, institutional carpet, 4 rows of seating. The kind of room where real proceedings happened, not performed for an audience, but conducted for a record. Judge Patricia Odom was already on the bench when we entered, our filing open in front of her, reading it the way people read things, when they intend to have already formed an opinion before the first word is spoken aloud. She was a woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular stillness of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by urgency. Philip Garrett, the Vance family's attorney. A man accustomed to winning on the strength of his firm's reputation, before the merits were discussed, took his seat at the respondent's table. Calvin settled behind him. Loretta sat 2 seats away, hands in her lap. Marlene sat behind me on the left, Hank beside her. I could feel their presence the way you feel the presence of people who have decided to be somewhere and mean it. Garrett rose first. Victor Hayes, he said, was a 65-year-old widower who had shown increasing emotional volatility and financial impulsivity since his wife's death. He called the account Hold's reckless unilateral actions taken under the influence of a biased attorney and an estranged sibling. He used cognitive vulnerability twice and undue influence 3 times. He never looked directly at me. Then Bob stood. He did not use those words. He used document record timestamp and evidence in that order, the way you lay out tools before you begin a job. He presented the recorder from the nightstand drawer. The email thread with Dr. Wells Julian's own words read aloud. "He'll be agitated about being left behind. That should give you what you need." Loretta's instruction sheet. The forged insurance beneficiary change. The green leather notebook with its itemized payments, the Wells fee marked cash. Do not record the notary cost for the Alaska port. Each item landed the way evidence lands when assembled by someone who knows the difference between information and proof. Garrett objected twice. Judge Odom sustained neither. When Bob set the bank camera footage on the clerk's desk, Julian and Loretta at the safe deposit counter time-stamped 4:47 p.m. the afternoon before the cruise, he said, "The petitioner was not on that ship. He was here, reading the documents." Calvin shifted in his seat. I watched it the way I had watched such movements my entire career as information. Garrett argued the evidence was obtained improperly. Bob replied that Victor had entered the property as a guarantor of record on the existing mortgage, that all materials were photographed in place without removal, and that their admissibility was well established under South Carolina evidentiary rules. He cited the case reference from memory. Judge Odom took her glasses off the chain, put them on, and looked at Garrett over the rims. "Are you suggesting the appropriate response to discovering a coordinated attempt to defraud you is to do nothing?" Garrett opened his mouth. That was not an invitation to answer. She looked at me. "Mr. Hayes, 31 years in bank compliance. When a family member places a cognitive decline notation on an elderly person's account, immediately before financial transactions that benefit that family member. What does that pattern indicate? Garrett was on his feet. Objection. The petitioner is not qualified as an expert. I'm not asking for expert testimony, Judge Odom said. I'm asking a man what his experience taught him to recognize. She looked back at me. I leaned forward slightly. In 31 years, I said, that pattern indicated elder financial exploitation every single time. The room went very quiet, not the managed quiet of a proceeding, but the specific weighted silence of a room in which something has been said that everyone present understood, and no one was going to unsay. Judge Odom wrote for 90 seconds without speaking. When she set her pen down, she looked at the room with the level gaze of someone who had nothing left to weigh. Before I rule, she said, I want to address the counterfiling submitted this morning by Vance Family Holdings and Julian Hale. She held up the slim stack of papers, then set it back down. The counterpetition requests an emergency protective order on the grounds of cognitive incapacity. The supporting documentation consists of a family declaration and a reference to a clinical evaluation that has not been conducted and that, according to evidence presented this morning, was to be purchased in cash for the purpose of producing a predetermined finding. The counter-petition is dismissed. Garrett shifted in his seat. On the petition brought by Victor Hayes, she continued, this court finds a pattern of coordinated action directed at undermining the petitioner's legal and financial autonomy, unauthorized use of a limited power of attorney, submission of fraudulent documents, manipulation of account records, solicitation of a manufactured medical evaluation, and alteration of insurance beneficiary designations without the petitioner's knowledge. She picked up her pen. The sound it made on the pad was the loudest thing in the room. The petition to establish protective oversight of Victor Hayes is denied, with prejudice. The court referred the forged documents and the Wells solicitation to investigative authorities. She looked at Garrett and told him in plain language that the counterfiling had no evidentiary basis and that his professional standing was not well served by repeating it. Garrett said nothing. It was the wisest thing he had said all morning. When the judge left the room, exhaled. Calvin buttoned his jacket and straightened his cuffs and said something low to Garrett that was not answered with reassurance. Loretta stood with her hands at her sides, looking at the floor, and then looked up and found me across the room and decided to cross it. Bob stepped into her path before she covered 3 feet. Ms. Vance, any further contact with my client goes through my office. He is family, she said. Her voice had lost the performance. He is my client, Bob said. Right now, that takes precedence. Hank appeared at my right shoulder, Marlene at my left. Loretta looked at the 3 of us at the shape of what that meant and walked out without looking back. Calvin followed. Bob turned to me. Well, he said. Well, I said. It was not celebration. It was the specific feeling of a man who has been standing in cold water for a very long time and has finally stepped onto dry ground. Not warmth, yet just the absence of cold. Marlene put her hand briefly on my arm. Breakfast, she said. I'm not asking. Hank said, she's not asking. Bob almost smiled. We walked out together into a hallway that was bright after the fluorescent dimness of the room we had just left. We had eggs and coffee at a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse that Marlene chose because it had booths, and she did not want to sit at a counter with her back to the room. That was Marlene. She had been picking restaurants with good sightlines since 1987, when she had worked briefly as a paralegal and had developed the habit of watching entrances. She ordered for all 4 of us without asking what anyone wanted on the grounds that anyone who had just survived a morning like this one did not need to make additional decisions, and nobody argued with her. Bob's phone buzzed while we were waiting for the food. He read the screen, made a note on the paper napkin in front of him, and set the phone face down. "Lender confirmation," he said. "The bridge loan disbursement is formally frozen. Their counsel received the court's referral documentation this morning, and they are preserving all records pending investigation." "How fast did they move?" I asked. "Faster than usual," Bob said, "which tells you how worried they are about their own exposure." He picked up his coffee. "When a lender discovers they were processing a loan secured by fraudulent documentation, they have two choices: cooperate immediately and establish good faith, or stonewall and become part of the investigation. Smart money cooperates." Hank said smart money usually does. I looked at my coffee cup and thought about Calvin Vance somewhere between the courthouse and whatever came next for him. His company had been waiting on that disbursement. I had seen it in the notebook, the bridge loan listed under CVH first installment, the figure beside it large enough to suggest it was not supplementing cash flow, but replacing it. A company that needed a bridge loan of that size was not a company operating from strength. It was a company operating from the assumption that the bridge would hold. The bridge had not held. Bob's phone buzzed again. He read it, and this time he set the napkin down. "Insurance carrier," he said. "The beneficiary change has been formally reversed pending fraud investigation. Your sister Marlene is reinstated as primary beneficiary." He looked at me. "Effective as of this morning." Marlene set her coffee cup down. She pressed her lips together for a moment, in the way she pressed them together when something had affected her that she did not intend to show. Then she picked the cup back up and said, "Good," in the tone of a woman closing a chapter. The food came. We ate mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that exists between people who have been through something together and do not need to narrate it while it is still happening. My phone lit up on the table beside my plate. Julian. A text this time, not a call. I had stopped answering his calls the evening before and had not resumed. "Dad, the ship's network is showing my accounts frozen. I can't access anything. Amber is telling me it's your fault. Please just tell me what's happening." I read it and set the phone face down without responding. Hank watched me do it and did not say anything, which was one of the things I had always valued about Hank. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up again. A number I did not recognize, a satellite call from the ship, I assumed the kind that cost several dollars a minute and that people used when they were desperate enough to pay for urgency. Calvin Vance. I let it ring. It rang 5 times and stopped. Then it rang again immediately, which was what people did when they could not accept that the first call had not been answered. I let that one ring too. Then it stopped and did not start again, and I understood that Calvin Vance had reached the stage of a crisis where he had run out of moves and knew it. Bob's phone buzzed a 3rd time. He read it, and this time something in his expression shifted, not surprise, but the specific recognition of a man seeing a predicted outcome arrive on schedule. "My contact at the county clerk's office," he said. "Vance Family Holdings filed for creditor protection this morning." Chapter 11. He set the phone down. They must have had the filing prepared in advance as a contingency, which means they knew the bridge loan was the last option. When it went, everything went with it. Chapter 11. Not dissolution, not yet, but the legal declaration that a company could no longer meet its obligations without court protection. The first step in a process that rarely ended with the company intact. I thought about the notebook entry, CVH Bridge First Installment, and the columns of figures that had not resolved into anything workable no matter how many times Julian had reworked the arithmetic. He had known. He had sat in that office with the legal pad and the cold coffee and the mounting stacks of unopened mail. And he had known that the numbers did not work. and that the only asset large enough to make them work was the one that belonged to me. Marlene put her fork down. "So it's done," she said. "The financial piece is done," Bob said. "The legal piece will take longer. Criminal referrals move at their own pace." He folded his napkin. "But the mechanisms they were counting on, the loan, the property, the insurance, the power of attorney, those are all closed." I looked out the diner window at the street. Somewhere on the water, moving north through the inside passage toward the Alaska coast, a ship was carrying my son and his wife and her family through scenery that none of them were looking at anymore. The excursions I had booked, the glacier tour, the whale watching, the kayaking in the harbor, were proceeding without them because the ship's activity desk did not care about frozen accounts or criminal referrals or the particular arithmetic of a family in freefall. My phone buzzed one final time. Not Julian. Not Calvin. A number I recognized as the ship's guest services line forwarded through a U.S. relay. I did not answer it. I drank my coffee and looked at the street, and let the morning be what it was, not victory exactly, but the end of something that should have ended long before it became what it had become. The title transfer recorded on Wednesday morning. Bob called at 8:43. "It's done. The Hayes Family Irrevocable Trust now holds the property. Locks changed Tuesday. The notice goes on the door today." I thanked him and drove north. I did not have a destination. I had a direction, which was enough. I stopped outside Charlotte for lunch, at a diner that had been there since the 70s, and ate chess pie and read a newspaper that contained nothing relevant to my life, which was exactly what I needed from it. I ended up in Asheville, at a small inn near the River Arts District, with a porch and a view of the mountains. I stayed 4 days. I slept. I walked. I sat with Claire's photograph on the table beside me and watched the mountains do what mountains do, stay put, regardless of what was happening at their feet. On the third evening, Bob called. "The ship docks tomorrow. They'll be back in Charleston by evening." I looked at the mountains going purple at the edges. "The property manager is set?" I asked. "Everything is documented," he said. Then after a pause, "How are you?" It was the first time he had asked me that directly. "I'm sitting on a porch in Asheville," I said, "looking at mountains." I drove back the next morning. I took the long way through the upstate, through the Piedmont, through towns that still had their original diners. I arrived in Mount Pleasant at 4:40. I parked 2 houses down. At 5:12, a full-size sedan with tinted windows pulled into the driveway. Julian got out first, same linen shirt from the cruise, wrinkled from the flight, moving with the tiredness of a man who had not slept well in a week. He walked to the front door. He reached into his pocket for his keys. I watched him insert the key. I watched him turn it and feel the flat, certain resistance of a lock that had been changed and did not know him. He tried again, then a third time. That was when he saw the notice. Amber was the first to react. She crossed the front path in 3 strides and grabbed the notice with both hands. The paper tore slightly at the corner. She read it on the porch, her jaw working, then turned to Julian and said something that made him step back. Calvin came around from the rear of the car and stopped when he saw them. He read the notice over Amber's shoulder, and his face did the thing faces do when a man who has spent his life believing money was sufficient armor discovers in a single afternoon that he has been wrong. Loretta sat down on the porch steps. Not dramatically. She simply ran out of standing. The property manager appeared from the side gate, clipboard in hand. Calvin pointed at him and began talking in the pressured way of a man who still believed volume and authority were the same thing. The property manager did not raise his voice. He held the clipboard and waited. Then the doors of a dark sedan at the curb opened. 2 men in plain clothes moved up the path With the unhurried certainty of people who were exactly where they were supposed to be, Julian saw them first. His face changed, not shock, but the specific collapse of the last remaining hope that the thing you feared might not happen. One of the men said his name. Julian took the summons with both hands like it was heavier than it was. Then he looked up and looked down the street. He was not surprised to see my car. A man caught off guard looked startled or desperate. Julian looked like a man who had known this was a possible outcome and had simply arrived at it. He had planned for contingencies his entire life. I had taught him that too. I gave him nothing to organize. I looked at my son across 2 houses in 38 years, and I started the car. I did not drive fast. I did not look in the rearview mirror when I turned the corner, because the corner was not the direction I was going. The street behind me was not my future. I had places to be, mornings to make use of, a life that was mine to keep. I drove. Sitting on that Asheville porch, watching the peaks fade into the sunset, I found peace. I survived, but my heart is heavy with a sobering lesson from my own family story. In the end, God sees everything, and no hidden plot can escape his ultimate justice. But my advice to you is simple: don't be like me. Don't let your love blind you to the point where you trust blindly. I spent decades building a life ignoring the warning signs because of politeness and a false sense of security. Never let your devotion turn into vulnerability. My opinion, love unconditionally, but protect your boundaries fiercely. The paper never lies, and sometimes the closest people require the sharpest boundaries. Every family story has its dark corners, but a true family story should be built on trust, not schemes. These painful memories now join the collection of deep grandpa stories, hard lessons passed down so the next generation won't repeat our mistakes. May these grandpa stories remind you to stay vigilant. If you want to hear more raw, life-changing grandpa stories, please share this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more profound journeys. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Please note, future episodes will include some fictional elements designed for educational and entertainment purposes. If this content does not suit your preferences, feel free to exit and choose another channel. Stay safe and take care.